This is the Human First AI Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and my guest this week is Warren Wilansky, president and founder at Plank. You can find them at plank.co. We're going to be talking about ethical AI and accessibility this week, which I think is really cool, Warren, because I think a lot of people are missing that AI is sure it's empowering, professionals and regular working folk, but there's also a lot of really cool advancements for accessibility and things. But with that comes a lot of ethical risks. And I think plenty of people are talking about data privacy and security and the environmental impact. So I'm excited to dive into all of that with you this week. But first, I wanted to ask you about the name of your company, Plank. You started this over 25 years ago. Do people ask you to plank a lot, or do you feel like you have to keep a good core after 25 years? Tell us about Plank.
Yeah, Mike, it's nice to meet you. It's funny when we chose the name Plank, it was, yoga existed, but it didn't have the same kind of presence as it does now. And I remember there was a certain point going back about 10 years ago where, we would search Google for Plank, and all of a sudden there suddenly were people on the floor lying down, and it just became a kind of a joke thing. But if you can find it, there is a picture of me on the internet in our office lying on our kitchen table. So.
Of course, there would have to be naturally. So how did you choose Plank, and why did you start it?
You know what, to be honest, I could, I'll do it. I'll tell you the lie and I'll tell you the truth. So the lie is, Plank is the basic building block of any, construction project. It's one of those sturdy elements that keeps all buildings together. That's the kind of nice, it ties in a little bit with the organic, it's wood, it's nature, it ties in with that side of things. But the actual truth is, it was just the word that came to mind. It was simple. It was one syllable, easy to remember.
Nice. A lot of people ask me about Avenue 9, and I haven't shared it on the podcast yet. I is the 9th letter of the alphabet. So the initials are kind of AI with A9. Oh. And then I was looking for other cool things where I could build like an AI into the logo. And of course, available domain names and everything else, but symbolizes like new paths to success and the end of an era before AI marketing and the start of a new one. So those are fun things. All right, let's talk about the ethics, because you also started the Ethical Web Collective and do a lot of work there. And I'll let you take the first crack at it, because that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. What does it mean to you?
So, when we first started thinking about this idea of the Ethical Web Collective, which is what we call it now, the word ethics was the word that at first kind of got my back up. And I was like, this word ethics, it felt really judgy at first. In other words, I was like, let's not use this word, because it'll feel like we're kind of telling people that they have to live up to some, humongous ethical standard. And it's not that way. Like, the way I see it is, we decided to use the word ethics because everybody understands in essence that we're standing for something, but our ethics might not be somebody else's. We are standing with the things that matter to us and the things that we think matter to our clients. And, somebody else could have a different series of ethics that they want to stand by, and that's fine too. So that's where I come down on it. And then, we have the ethics that we believe are important to developing websites beyond a website being usable, easy to navigate, and beautiful.
So there's kind of 4 big buckets here on the Ethical Web Collective website. If people want to get involved or learn more about it, they can do a little Google search there. But privacy, security is a big one. Accessibility and inclusion is a big one. Environmental impact and responsible development. I would like to start with the accessibility and inclusion, because I haven't done a lot of work in this area, but I know that the way I'm using AI to translate my messages into different languages, or take a video format like we're recording this podcast in and turn it into audio or text or all kinds of other, formats that anybody could possibly need, is a really cool function of AI. But as you mentioned, you were doing this long before AI. So what do you think maybe are some common myths and misconceptions around accessibility and inclusion in web design?
I mean, when we're building a website, we want as many people to be able to use it as possible. And we want to reduce all barriers for that. In other words, we want to make sure that, if somebody comes to our site, they could have a series of different challenges that we can't anticipate. And we can't anticipate that we're building a website for us. In other words, look, I am a 50-year-old white male, and I have a certain way of seeing the world and a certain view with that the world is very simply made in essence for, North American world. It caters to me. And there are so many other profiles that I think we should take into account. In other words, people's lives are different. Somebody could be living in a remote area of, the Arizona, and they don't have a great connection to the internet. So why shouldn't we offer up a website, a website experience that downloads quickly so that somebody who has a bad internet connection can have that as well? Or if somebody is visually impaired, why can't we develop a website that is easy to navigate through a screen reader so that they can then navigate and get through the site and have a similar, have an equally good experience if it's different. So we want to support that, but also even take into account mobile. We want to make sure that somebody can come to a website and, it is quick to download as well. There are all these different small things that take a little bit of extra effort, but they go a long way to helping other people. Also, certain states have laws on the books that support and ensure that sites are accessible, and some places will enforce it legally as well. So I just want to make sure that we're taking into account and kind of making sure that the lowest common denominator is at the highest level possible.
Yeah, I think, naturally it makes a lot of sense for business owners and stuff, just because we want to, if there's qualified prospects or customers for out there, we want to reach as many of those as possible, right? And
totally.
Our product might not be right for everybody, but the people that it is right for, we want to make sure that we can communicate with. So I think that is kind of basic table stakes. So I want to ask you to go a little bit deeper and talk about some of the tools or techniques that you found and ones that have changed or come out recently in that regard.
I mean, the core that we usually start from is Google has something called Lighthouse built in to the browser, where you can start there, and basically it will go through and give a ranking for all of these different things that, from accessibility, speed, all those different things. So we start there. But even with that doesn't always meet all of the criteria as well. In other words, we have to look at things from a coding perspective as well. And my team has invested the time and energy into understanding what the W3C standards and expectations are, and then we try to meet those guidelines for every project that we take on.
And what's responsible development? I've never heard that term before.
So responsible development is, it's not only about meeting coding standards. That's one side of things. In other words, we want to make sure that we're meeting modern coding standards and making sure that, that the code and the work that we do can be taken over and maintained by others. So we want to make sure that we are responsible in that we take into account future developers of the site. In other words, there might be somebody on our team that has to inherit the code that somebody wrote 3 years ago. And that means the code should be well documented. It should be easy for somebody to be able to get through. And also we want to make sure we can support our clients, so that responsible development means we don't just hand somebody a content management system to manage their site. We hand it to them with documentation and proper information on how to work with it. And we work hard to try to build a content management system that's easy to navigate.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've been doing web design for 25, 30 years now. And it's funny. Sometimes my clients still to this day will say like, well, we have a current web developer. We're going to have to play nice and make sure we get the logins and credentials and everything. Well, if they're professionals, no, we've all done this. You and I've built hundreds of websites. We're not that picky about it. If somebody else is a better fit or it's going another direction, happy to pass it off and let you take care of it. Like I feel like it's sometimes my time to steward websites or apps and things. And, I'm really good at certain stuff. So if it's, taking a bad homemade Wix site and getting you to a professional WordPress site, great. That's another thing. But if you want a custom development, project, or you're building a community or something, maybe that's better for somebody else. And I think passing back and forth is something that just happens day to day in software development, like you said, even within your own team. So it's hard to be too protective of it, I think, when you're a professional. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, we aim to use open source software so that, we don't lock anybody into anything proprietary. I mean, we work with WordPress, we do custom development, and yeah, you're right. I mean, projects come and go. People want to move on to work with other people. And just as we would hope that somebody would deliver us the keys, in a professional way, we want to do the same thing as well. We would never want to hold somebody hostage or have somebody feel like, oh, if we don't work with them, what are they going to do? Are they going to, are they going to take hold of our site? Like, no, we want to make sure that when we hand off our work, we hand it off in the best shape possible so the people on the other end and the clients can take it and, do what they need to do with it.
Yeah, I love that. And I've just found, I think also as you get further into your career, you realize that like you never know the crazy circumstances that are going to happen. If that client's son or daughter gets a degree in web design and they're doing amazing work and they're better than you want to hand off something you're proud of to that person. Or another opportunity, that company that you're working for gets acquired by a Fortune 500 company. You want them to say, wow, this smaller company has a better website than we do. Who built this? Not like, oh, what trash kind of, duct tape and chicken wire did they use to build this thing, right? You want to have stuff that you're proud of and be able to hand off in a way that makes you proud of your work. So
for sure,
all of that is great. Now I want to switch topics to the environmental impact, because this to me is something I don't think the average person is aware of, especially with AI now, that there are server farms the size of Central Park in Texas, and they're taking enough power to send somebody back in time, like 1.21 gigawatts of power, which is basically a small city. And that's what these things are, just of computers. And so if we're not building, or at least thinking about the environmental impact of what servers and AI is doing, then I think we're really missing a large part of the story. What's your story with environmental impact?
So it's interesting because when we first started talking about it, not to say it was before AI, but it was before AI kind of became a popular topic of conversation. So we were just looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, so we built this website for somebody and it ends up being high trafficked. In other words, let's say we had built a website for a local events company where they were selling tickets. So, it's one thing to think, oh, it's a website. Somebody clicks it open. It loads a little bit of CSS, a little bit of HTML, a few images. But that's fine when you take it from the perspective of one person. What happens when 50,000 people start doing that? Suddenly that website or that host, you start to measure, okay, well, it's actually taking up a substantial amount of energy to actually drive that. Now, when you layer on AI, like you mentioned, AI, people don't realize every time they're just typing some question into the browser, the amount of computational power that actually drives that interaction is high. I mean, if anybody has seen in the news, I mean, Microsoft just got, a nuclear power plant restarted to help power their needs. I mean, that's an extreme amount of power that once you put it into that perspective, you can start to understand, oh, that's maybe a city's worth of power that they're asking for.
Yeah, one of the latest models, so the cutting edge stuff that's not released to the public yet, one question to the AI can cost over $100,000 to compute and run. And the training that it has to do in order to be able to do that is just astronomical. And I don't think people realize that all of these companies are losing money on this too, because they're not charging enough to even cover the power usage on this, let alone their staffs and their team yet. So it's a mind-boggling, fascinating thing. What can a small business owner do, or maybe a marketing agency? What should they be thinking about when they're thinking about developing their sites and their products?
I mean, I think they should be taking into account, even something as simple as if you're working with a content management system and you're uploading something into your website, optimize your images. Something that's a very simple one. You don't have to upload a 5,000 pixel across image if you really only need to display it on a web browser in a smaller size. That's low hanging fruit. From our perspective, from a development perspective, we optimize our code. We make sure that things are minimized. We do what we can from a technical perspective to kind of do that. But also from a design perspective, there are ways that we can ensure that, something can be well designed, but also be, environmentally conscious. We discourage, somebody loading video the second that somebody hits a website. That's, that should be more of a choice rather than a design aesthetic choice. And then you're not, especially if, let's say, somebody's on a mobile phone and suddenly you're putting a 100 meg video or 200 meg video onto an internet connection that isn't meant for that. Those are the kind of things that we would take into account when developing a site.
I think the video is a great example. I mean, really, nobody likes it when those things play automatically. And now a lot of us are not working in offices with other people where that's super annoying and something pops up and plays sound on your computer right away. But it still is a major use of bandwidth and distraction if those are auto playing. And it does make for some cool designs, I gotta say, when you have like a video playing in the background of a thing, but let's at least optimize it or really make those choices, I think, intelligently, because you see videos that like you can't even notice they're there. They're covered by a semi-transparent image and text all over it, but there's cool motion in the background. You're wondering what the cost and benefits are of those types of things.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, I don't expect the average person to be thinking about that. If you're using your device, use it. You're trying to experience it and how you want. But I think from a development perspective, from a company that's advising others on how to build things, again, we come back to that word ethics, because I think it's our job to set those standards if our clients are not even thinking about it. We hope they're thinking about it, but if they're not, we're going to think about it for them.
And that goes to data and privacy and security of all of these things. I've had security experts on the podcast and everything, so we can hit this one quickly, I think. But I would love to hear from your perspective, especially for small businesses, nonprofits, people that want to do things the right way. Maybe what are some of those things they're missing, they're not thinking about, or problems and challenges that you see that people are skipping over?
So, I mean, if you've had security experts on your podcast before, I'm not even going to get too deep into the technical side of things. I'm sure they probably covered it. I'll deal with, let's say, the storing of data. In other words, marketers love to gather data. There's no question about it. They have this impression of the more information we can get about a client or a customer, the more empowered we are to kind of do what we can and offer them the best experience possible. The majority of marketers don't do anything with that data. So if you're not doing anything with it, what do you need it for? If you're just hoovering up data for the sake of hoovering it up, and you're just creating a liability for yourself to be storing all that information, why not actually invest into creating an experience that is actually targeted based on what you can do with it? In other words, if you have all this data and you're not doing anything with it, and you're not using it in an intelligent way, only collect what you need. Also, be prepared to kind of scrub your data. In other words, if somebody gave you information 6 months later, 12 months later, 5 years later, chances are that data is out of date. And, you should probably on a regular basis be reconnecting and basically saying, hey, you're a part of our mailing list, or you're part of some kind of way that data is being stored. And we want to just confirm that this is still correct, give you the opportunity to unsubscribe or resubscribe. And then you're making connections with people who really, really want to hear from you.
Yeah, I love reactivation campaigns. It's one of my favorite things to do as a marketer, and business owners hate it.
Oh, of course they hate it, because they're like, well, you're making me lose
90% of our list is gone.
Yeah.
They weren't reading it anyway.
Exactly.
They were all bouncing. And same thing with that data. We're going to use it someday, Warren, or won't we want this once we finally get up to, the profitability where we can mine this data and take advantage of it. And I think two things come to mind for me when you describe that. One is the storage fees. Again, you're just costing yourself money and the environment energy to just store massive amounts of data that you're never going to use. And the other thing that you hinted on there, but it could be 5-10 years later. And if you're storing credit cards and other things, that just is increasing your liability and stuff. So one, nobody should be storing credit card numbers. That should all be done through a processor these days. But if you've been doing it for a long time, you got a lot of crazy data and old systems or order history and stuff. There are laws on the books now in the EU and other places where if they haven't bought from you in a year or 3 years, you have to delete their data. And so we need to be paying attention to those as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it's easier to just follow the most strict rules. In other words, GDPR is pretty strict, and it doesn't apply to a lot of places in North America. But it's just easier to default to that level, and then you then are abiding worldwide with what the expectations are. It just makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think. I forget the words now. I was going to try and come up with this really cool quote that somebody said about like North America is for innovation, Europe is for regulation, and the East is for imitation, where they copy it and make it cheaper. We've seen some AI announcements recently doing the same thing again. And so I think if you just think about that, it's nice that our cultures are about innovation and moving fast and breaking things sometimes, but maybe we should also pay attention to the people that are worried about how this executes for humanity and in an ethical way for our clients and people that we're trying to take care of.
But I think you can serve all three. In other words, like, I think you can innovate and break things, but in a small contained way. Now, you don't, I mean, Facebook popularized that idea of like, let's move fast and break things. But if you're doing that, you're breaking things for some people, and you then are damaging your relationship with some people. If you think that's fine and that's part of where you go ethically, again, when I say ethics, I don't mean in a judgy way. If that's the approach you want to take, then that's fine. But then you're only serving certain groups of people, and that's your choice as an organization. If you have a client, or if we want to serve more people, then we choose to then, go towards more regulation and make Europeans happy. If we don't care about a European market, that's fine too. And if you want to just focus on, other areas, that's all great. I think it really comes down to what you want to do as an organization and serve yourself the best way you can.
Yeah, and that's why I was really excited to talk to you today, because I think if you want to work for larger organizations, you better figure out how to do some of these things. And even for the small businesses that might be, listening to this podcast, if you want to do business with the United States government or with larger corporations, they're going to expect you to be compliant and ethical and responsible in the way that you're doing things. And your niche is in nonprofits, where a lot of people care about the impact they're trying to serve, communities or audiences that are underserved, and they want to do that in the best way possible. And so I think there are niches of people that really care about these things, even if you don't. The people that you're serving do. And so I wanted to ask you, about serving the nonprofit and more mission driven organizations. Do they market differently? Do they build differently or use AI differently than a commercial business or a capitalistic business?
It's funny. Like, I would say that the interesting thing about it is that having worked with nonprofits or even having collaborated with a bank, everybody comes at it from a different perspective, but almost always comes back to the same place. In other words, everybody wants to do something for different reasons, and they end up coming to the same place. In other words, a nonprofit wants to be mindful of things because they're very, very concerned about their relationship that they build with the donors who give them money. But a bank wants to be just as careful about the relationship it has with its customers, but because they want to be responsible about the information that they're storing, because they're dealing with money. So it's interesting that they seem to come at it from very, very different perspectives, but the result in the end is usually pretty much the same.
Yeah, I think that's the way it should be, right? And even if we think about marketing tactics, I think you should be making those same decisions. That just because you might be able to get away with spamming somebody doesn't mean you should. And just because you have a cause that you think everybody should know about doesn't mean they want to know about it and opt in either. So I think on either side of that line, really the human first marketing tactics are the same. It's about treating people the way they want to be treated, getting opt-ins and consent from both sides, from your customers, but also from your team and that you want to work with the people and they're being responsible and stuff and qualifying, which is something businesses almost never talk about, which is you don't want everyone to become your customer. And some people aren't a good fit for you, or they're not being ethical, and they're going to misuse your product or things. So fascinating discussion today. But before I let you go, I want to ask you our fun question about predicting the future. So we won't hold you to this. We know that could go a lot of different directions, and only the AI knows at this point. But if you had to predict where marketing and website design and AI is going for businesses and nonprofits in the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think the biggest shifts are?
So it's interesting, having done this over 25 years, every few years, there's a new disruptive technology that is going to make the end of website design. And, it's anywhere from the beginning where it was Dreamweaver. And then it was this tool. And then it was Squarespace. And then it was Wix. And now it's AI. And there's always some new technology that's disruptive. What I find has happened is with that, what ends up happening is just layers of complexity get added on. So a website used to be, as I mentioned earlier before, some code and some images and some text. And that's what a website was before. And then it becomes a social media layer, a marketing layer, a website content management layer. And now there's going to be an artificial intelligence layer. And some websites are doing that and kind of aiming to support it. The reason why I don't think a website is ever going away is that every organization needs its own central space to be. In other words, there is social media and people are going to have a presence there. But in the end of the day, there has to be almost like a single source of truth for an organization. And their space online has to be the one central source of truth. So I don't think that's going away. What a website could look like or how it's used could change. In other words, maybe it will eventually be some VR goggles that are kind of overlaying information in the real world. Maybe it will go in that direction. Some of that technology exists. Nobody's kind of perfected how to get it totally right and almost seamless in somebody's life. Yeah.
I mean, there could be communities and people are predicting like a browserless internet. Like it might not be a 2D sheet of paper, but I like what you were saying there. If we're going to need some sort of digital storefront, we need some place to go. I know people were buying, spaces in the metaverse and stuff for their digital storefronts, which I always thought was silly. But, now it kind of makes sense. It's like, okay, we need some sort of virtual place that people can go to get information about us or ask questions. And it might not be that 2D website, but I really don't see those going away either. I'm with you. Maybe, we started, in the same time when we were still coding by hand before Dreamweaver and things. So maybe we're still biased, but I think there is an aspect that's going to survive. Now, if we go super far out, if we go like 30 years out, what's your best prediction on which sci-fi movie we end up in? What do you think?
I mean, it's funny. I should probably ask my father and something like that, or because his perception of the world now compared to what it's like 30 years ago or 40 years ago for him is almost magical. So I'm going to guess that in 30 years from now, when I'm an older man, there's going to be some magical things in the world that I could not have anticipated right now. So I know I'm skirting the issue because I have no clue how to answer that, but I suspect
What do you think marketing looks like? Do you think we end up in like a Minority Report thing where we're getting these scans and pop-ups and virtual space and hologram ads thrown at us? Or is it more of like a Back to the Future Part 2, I think is a fun one to think about, where it was just kind of like obnoxious and loud and like the whole country turned into a Las Vegas of sorts?
It could be. I think the Minority Report is a more interesting one because I already see pieces of that existing. In other words, you see these drone kind of orchestrated light shows and things like that, and you can start to imagine a world where you're walking around in things that don't seem real and seem kind of magical. And I think we're close to that. I think just we haven't seen something that was just like that snap of like, oh, that's really, really different. But I think some of the technology is leaning in that direction.
I think AI is on the personalization front. So that's one of my favorite topics to talk about, is that I think the internet is going to be different for you than it is for me. Just like when we log into Netflix or Facebook, you see something completely different than what I see. I watched Doctor Who and then Broadchurch, and Netflix thought I was British for like 3 weeks. I started getting all kinds of, of different things in my algorithm. And I think what people don't understand is the whole internet, our whole experience could be our own personal algorithms versus any sort of standard truth like this is the ESPN.com website. Well, no, that's what it looks like if you go to it. But if I go to it, it's going to be completely different teams, news stories, angles. It can be personalized, even shows that we watch on Netflix. We could be like, oh, I loved it when that character went to Kansas City. That was so cool. And you're like, what do you mean? They went to Quebec. And I'm like, my version of this episode can be completely different than yours. And that is going to be mind-boggling.
I think that's a really good observation. I mean, it reminds me, both of us have been doing this for long enough. It reminds me of the day when I started to notice that my Google search results were different than somebody else's. And it was just based on where we were, geographically, what I had searched, what have the algorithms basically learned to display different things. And it'll start to get more and more extreme. And I don't use extreme in a negative way, but it's just going to get to be more and more personalized.
I think so. As the AI algorithms on the other side get better, but also you'll have your own personal AI and algorithm that will filter what you see or translate what you see into the way that you prefer to consume it, which I think is also a cool accessibility thing and brings us full circle. So Warren, before we let you go, we've been talking to Warren Wilansky, founder, president at Plank. Plank.co is the website. You connect with him on LinkedIn as well. But last question for you is How can you help us, or how can we help you?
I don't think there's anything specific. I mean, this has been a great conversation. I enjoy doing things like this, and Mike, you've been a great host. So nothing on my end.
There you go. You nailed it. Obviously, if you need web design or you need insight into these, or you want to learn more about the Ethical Collective as well, go check that out. That was awesome. And for Avenue 9, if you need help navigating the AI marketing world and you want to learn about how predictive analytics or generative AI are impacting marketing, you can reach out to me, Mike Montague, on LinkedIn, or go to avenue9.com. Just schedule a consultation session. Let's chat and see where you're at and where you want to go. Until next time, keep going. Have fun, everybody.